In his work on spiritual fatherhood, author Jacques Philippe addresses the various goods that fatherhood provides. And the book, in one sense, could be targeted to priests insofar as spiritual fatherhood, but really it addresses the broader spiritual component of fatherhood in general. And so, for example, one of the goods that he underscores about fatherhood is that it creates fraternity. And he identifies that precisely by having the same father, we begin to recognize our equality among one another as siblings. Or another one, he says, is freedom. He says, by providing structure and boundaries and expectations, we are freer then to discover ourselves than if we had no context or no framework within which to operate at all. But for our sake today, one of those goods that he highlights is inheritance, but it's the kind of inheritance of our very being. So Father Philippe states that one of the roles of fatherhood is to awaken us to the truths of our existence, human and spiritual values, culture, national traditions, and then, of course, the spiritual life. And in this way, he says, we come to experience gratitude for the sacrifices and hard work of those who came before us, as well as recognize in all of this our own responsibility to those who will come after us. And so the word that we can use here is the gift of patrimony, and that is from the Latin word pater, which means father. And he does this wonderful job making all these connections. So this week, as I was thinking about these things and walking around, I began to recognize that we sort of see our patrimony all over the place. Like, for example, all the buildings that we pass were built by our forefathers. Or even the freedoms that we enjoy, we are reminded that they come as a result of the sacrifices of those men whose faces are on those banners that are all over the poles throughout our entire community, immortalized into our minds. But the greatest gift that anyone could give anybody, because of its limitless potential, is the gift of faith. And this is especially true in a time such as ours, where the architecture of our culture no longer shares the gospel worldview and therefore is no longer handing that view on. And so there is no one else to do it unless someone hands us our patrimony. And I think one of the best examples in all of human history of this happening, I mean, it's so incredible, it's nothing short of a miracle, happens in the family of St. Joseph. So to get there, I want to return briefly to our reading from Ezekiel. Ezekiel is writing at a time when the inheritance, the patrimony of the Israelites was totally decimated. Their kingdom had been divided, the Babylonian Empire had wiped them out, and any of the survivors, they were led off into exile in a foreign country. Their land, their liturgies, their lifestyle, totally lost. And they were, of course, in grave danger as a people of assimilating into pagan culture. And so that's kind of the context in which we find ourselves now with the collapse of Christendom. And yet it's precisely in this space that God promises them something that seems totally absurd. He says, I will take from the topmost branches of the crest of cedar. Now, what does that mean? The cedar trees, the Israelites, the crest is the royal Davidic kingdom. And so he's going to take from the topmost branches of the crest of the cedar a tiny shoot. Now, that's evocative of Isaiah, who will speak in our Advent readings of a shoot that shall sprout from the stump of Jesse, and Jesse is David's family. And so this shoot that springs from the ashes of the Davidic dynasty is going to start as small as a mustard seed, but God's going to plant it, and it's going to become this enormous tree whose branches are going to cover birds of every sort. Well, who is that? It's Jesus Christ. And the tree that's enormous is the church. And the birds that it catches are the Gentiles. Now, the Israelites don't know this. This is centuries before this is even close to being fulfilled. But what they did do is they began to hand this patrimony on very faithfully, one generation to the next. And they did this with no evidence whatsoever to support their faith. When everyone around them probably thought they were insane, they kept handing God's promise on to the next generation, and the generation after that, and the generation after that. Wars took place, empires rose and fell, and they kept whispering the words of God's promise in the ears of their children until hundreds of years later, this unexpected situation where they were allowed to go and rebuild their life opened for them a possibility. And the tiny remnant of David's family went off and they built this tiny little town called Nazareth. Maybe you've heard of it. And the root word netzer means shoot, because they believed the shoot was going to come. So they built the town of the shoot. And it did come. It came to a young virgin named Mary who was betrothed to Joseph after all of these years of waiting. But the key piece to that, since we are Annunciation, is that she was ready to receive him. And yes, we default to the Immaculate Conception because of that. But it's also because her ancestors taught her to never lose hope and to be ready when it comes, because it's coming. And she was. But the same is true for us. We are a people with a past who bear a promise that must prepare our children to receive it. And if we want to be ready when Jesus comes, we have to have our descendants to be prepared. We have to work to hand the gospel on to the next generation. And it's going to take all of us. But because it's Father's Day, and we're talking about patrimony, fathers, I make a special appeal to you.